So now that we understand the anatomy, we understand how the hormone flow works inside the male, that gets us into what are the products of the male reproductive system. So the end product of the male reproductive system should be sperm. It should be constantly produced by that male animal through a process called spermatogenesis. Now, this is something where if we start to see males not produce sperm over their lifetime or not produce viable sperm, that tells us that something in the male reproductive system is not working correctly. So end goal should always be sperm in the male. Now, spermatogenesis, if you notice, here's these words, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So spermatogenesis is meiosis. We're just giving it a more specific name and telling you that it's now meiosis in the male. So you'll notice that we'll start with a cell. We call this a spermatogonium, and that lives in the seminiferous tubule. Then as we start to produce more mature sperm, it starts to break off and go through meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. At the end of meiosis 2, we should see 4 healthy and viable sperm that are ready to travel through the middle of the seminiferous tubule into that rete testes tube in the mediastinum and then into the epididymis for maturation so that it actually can swim properly and kind of have some final packaging done. Now, I like this diagram because it really shows you that if we're looking inside this testicle, inside those lobules of the testicular parenchyma have little tubes. And that tube, the seminiferous tubule, if we were to cross-section it, looks just like this. So as we see meiosis 1 and 2 occurring, like I said, we're starting with this primordial germ cell, so just the beginning of what should be a sperm. And it starts to move through meiosis 1 and 2. And so it starts to divide. And as it divides, at the end of meiosis 2, we should see 4 viable spermatids. They're going to then travel down into the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. Lumen is just a fancy word for the middle or the exit or the hole. And then they're going to exit into the epididymis for maturation. Now, when we talk about sperm produced in different species, there's going to be a major difference in concentration, in volume. So one of the things that you'll notice is that it's very normal for us in sheep to only get 1 milliliter of sperm in an ejaculate. But if you look at swine, they release over 225 milliliters of ejaculate during one ejaculation. So these are ways for us to really understand what's healthy or normal for an organism. If I ever saw pigs only giving off 1 ml, I would be concerned. But I wouldn't be concerned, right, if I said, I had a bull that only gave off 5.5 milliliters of sperm. Perfect. That's within the normal range. Now, the second product that I want to talk about that the male system has to produce is testosterone. And testosterone has a lot of different functions in the male. So we're going to see it do everything from producing a sex drive, keeping a male that looking like a male, so very rigid, muscle. And you can really see the difference if you kind of picture a steer in your mind versus a bull, or if you need to get on Google and look up some pictures. Steers are just kind of smooth. They're a little bit softer, a little more tender, which is why we eat their meat. Whereas bulls have a very rough, edgy, thick, very intense muscular appearance to the front of them that steers just do not have. And that comes all down to testosterone. Testosterone is also absolutely necessary for sperm production, and it's responsible for animals growing, and it helps animals put on more muscle versus fat, which is very important in our breeding animals. And then last but not least, we should see after the male has produced that sperm in his system, we should see a mating desire. So even if a male has great sperm, if they don't have the ability to go find a female and go through the act of copulation, we won't see eggs fertilized. So copulation is really the process of a male placing the sperm into the female reproductive tract, and males have to have that desire, otherwise we can't keep them on our production system. And then last but not least, after copulation, I really want to see one lucky sperm make its way into the egg, and I want to see fertilization occur in the female. And that's really where we stop the male reproductive process and we start talking about the female reproductive process. And that would be officially fertilization. Okay, so when sperm actually gets into the egg, their genetics combine. And this is actually a real picture of an egg with actual sperm, which is pretty incredible. And they produce an offspring, and it starts off as a primitive kind of cellular organism that we call the zygote. Now, there's a great video on your playlist. Go take a look. It's going to kind of walk you through sperm's journey in the female and get you prepared for the female next week. Now, last thing I want to remind you is make sure and go back and get that lecture handout that's posted on Blackboard this week. You're going to want that to kind of go through as you're working through this lecture series and as you're practicing for your final quiz.